Hello, how are you doing? It's become a lovely tradition that every year former US President Barack Obama posts a list of books that he will be reading over the course of the summer. It's kind of become like an informal Obama's book club, and I always really enjoy and anticipate looking through this list of books and reading some of his choices because he has such interesting and eclectic reading tastes. And just yesterday, he posted his summer reading list for 2023. So I'm here with my Reading Rainbow t-shirt to look through this list of 9 books that are a mixture of fiction and non-fiction. Some of these books I've never even heard of before. Some are more popular ones that I have been interested in. And I've only read one of them so far. So I'm going to go through each title. I would love to know if you have read any of these books, if you would also recommend them, or if you're interested in reading them now. So the very first book is a nonfiction title called Poverty by America by Matthew Desmond, who is a Pulitzer Prize winning author for his previous book called Evicted. And this nonfiction title looks at this large question of why there is still so much widespread poverty in America when it is such a developed nation and democracy. So this is one of the biggest issues that the nation is facing, and he examines how there are structural reasons for this, that a lot of the measures put in place to give people financial relief really benefit most the people that are already fairly well off, or at least comfortable financially in their lives. In addition to looking at the reasons for this, he also tries to think through solutions about how we can change this problem. It's such a timely and complex issue that really we all need to be thinking much more about. Next is a novel called Small Mercies by Dennis Lehane. This is set in the summer of 1974 in Boston, following a woman whose daughter has gone missing, but also a young black man has been found dead. So it's about the mystery surrounding these two figures, but also how during that time there was a desegregation of the public school system, and this resulted in a lot of disruption and violence. So it's also examining this larger issue to do with racism in America. So this author was also wrote the books Mystic River and Shutter Island. There's a big new biography about Martin Luther King Jr. by Jonathan Eig called King: A Life. This is an author that previously wrote a biography about Muhammad Ali, and this book looks at the full complexity of the great civil rights leader from his beginnings when he was a boy and his parents just referred to him as Little Mike, up until his assassination, and how there are many different views about him. Some people felt that he wasn't progressive enough. Other people thought he was too radical, and this is based on a lot of new research of interviews that the author conducted, but also how he examined FBI files which have been released of surveillance that was conducted about Martin Luther King Jr. So this sounds absolutely fascinating. Hello, Beautiful by Ann Napolitano. This is a novel which mostly takes place in the 1980s, following a woman named Julia who's very ambitious and spirited, and she meets a man named William who has a very traumatic past, and they form a relationship with each other, but because partly due to his past, it causes a lot of disruption within her family, especially between her and her sisters, who she's very close with. So I became really interested in this when I learned it was partly inspired or based on Little Women, and makes a story about sisterhood, but also about love and grief. And also this became very well known recently when it was chosen as the 100th pick from Oprah's book club. All the Sinners Bleed by S.A. Cosby. This is a crime novel that's also about much larger issues. The story is to do with a man that becomes the first black sheriff of a county in the American South, and how he really wants to enact positive change, but how this becomes much more complex when events start to unfurl to do with a school shooting and to do with long-standing abuse. And S.A. Cosby is obviously a favored author by Obama because Obama had also chosen his previous novel, Razorblade Tears, for his summer reading list last year. Birnam Wood by Eleanor Catton, the much anticipated follow-up by the author of the magnificent novel The Luminaries. This is a story about a farming collective in New Zealand that want to utilize a tract of land that's been abandoned to grow crops for the community, but also an American billionaire has a special interest in this land. So it's about his interaction and sort of infiltration of this group and the dramatic events that follow, but it's also a very in-depth psychological portrait of a number of people involved in this incident. And I really enjoyed aspects of this book, but it took a long time to get going for me, and I made a whole video discussing all of my thoughts and feelings about it, so I'll put a link to that below. What Napoleon Could Not Do by D.K. Nnuro. This is a novel about a few different characters and how they all have a very different view about America. So there's a brother and sister who grow up in Ghana. They both want to move to America. The sister eventually is able to move to America, and she studies law there and marries a very wealthy American man. And her father comments she did what Napoleon could not do. So that's where the title comes from. But also her husband, growing up in America and fighting in the Vietnam War, he has a very different view about the country. But it also follows the story of her brother, who is kind of stuck in Ghana and finds it much more difficult to move to America. And so how this portrait of all these different characters show that there's no one true understanding of what America is and what it can do. The Wager, A Tale of Shipwreck, Mutiny, and Murder by David Grann. This sounds like such a fascinating nonfiction book and about a really complex case. A British vessel set out from England during an imperial war with Spain, and it was on a secret mission. But a couple years later, a group of men were found adrift on this very ramshackle vessel that they'd cobbled together, and they were survivors of that vessel's shipwreck. And they were greeted as heroes. But then sometime later, a few other people were found adrift, having survived that shipwreck as well, and they have a very different view about what went down on this ship that crashed. So it's looking at the question of what really happened and the truth about this. But it also sounds like just such a great, true high sea adventures tale. And finally, there is Blue Hour by Tiffany Clarke Harrison. This is a novel told in a kind of stream of consciousness style, following a young woman who's biracial and a photographer and who struggles with fertility issues when she wants to become a mother. And a boy in her photography class is a victim of police violence. So it's about these very personal issues, but also these larger issues in America. So those are all the picks on Obama's summer 2023 reading list. Some really interesting choices that I'm looking forward to reading. Like I said, I'd love to know if you have read any of these books or if you're interested in reading any of them now. Now, also because a number of books have been being banned in schools across America, Obama's also been involved with an organization called the Banned Book Club to give digital access to these titles which have been banned in different schools. Books like The Hate You Give by Angie Thomas and I'm a Gay Wizard by V.S. Santoni and The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison and Beyond the Gender Binary by Alok Vaid Menon, who's a really interesting speaker. So I'm keen to read this book as well. So I'll put a link to the Banned Book Club below as well, so you can find out more information about it if you want to. But thank you for watching me discuss all of these books. I hope you have a wonderful summer of reading, and I will speak to you again soon. Bye-bye.